The official 911 transcript later recorded her words, "Yes, I'm surrounded by military-grade grills. There's aggressive meat smoke. One man is using a tactical spatula." That was Patricia Garrison, voice quivering with theatrical panic, calling the authorities over a backyard barbecue. Minutes later, a convoy of jeeps crested the hill like a suburban cavalry charge. American flags whipped in the wind, coolers rattled in truck beds, and 7 ex-Marines hollered battle cries that echoed across the trees. The woman who made the call stood in my gravel driveway, white-knuckling her phone like it was a detonator. Patricia Garrison, self-declared president of a homeowners association that didn't actually exist. My name is David Sullivan. I'm 40, a former Marine with 2 decades of service, now running a quiet landscape consulting business. I'd bought 5 acres in Pine Valley Ranch, a peaceful rural subdivision about 30 miles from the city, with no HOA, no nonsense, and no neighbors in shouting distance. It was meant to be paradise. That dream lasted right up until Patricia inserted herself into my world. She lived 2 lots down in a soulless beige stucco home that looked like it came free with a generic cable subscription. Her yard was littered with signs that screamed like prison warnings: "No trespassing," on every post, "No parking," on property lines that weren't even hers. The creepiest one? Hung on her mailbox, "Authorized grass height zone." There had never been an HOA in Pine Valley Ranch. Patricia had tried to start one 5 years earlier but was unanimously voted down by every landowner. That didn't stop her. Instead, she invented the Pine Valley Property Standards Authority, printed some convincing letterhead, and began mailing out her own courtesy compliance notices. The trouble with Patricia really kicked off when I decided to host a simple reunion, a weekend gathering of Marine buddies I hadn't seen in years. 7 guys, steaks on the grill, some fishing, stories by the fire. I'd sent a group text, cleared space by the lake, and looked forward to a couple of days of peace, laughter, and maybe a bit of whiskey. Seemed harmless enough. That Friday, my old friend Jake Morrison rolled in first, RV in tow, parking near the fire pit. Within an hour, the rest of the team had arrived: Tommy Richards, Mike Donovan, Carlos Ramirez, Frank Peterson, and Ray Caldwell. We pitched tents, fired up the grill, and cracked open some beers. That's when Patricia made her first move. She came stomping up the drive like a mall cop with something to prove, clipboard in hand, dressed in crisp khakis, a navy blazer, and sunglasses that looked like they'd been ordered straight out of a Bond villain catalog. Pinned to her jacket was a fake badge that caught the sunlight just wrong. "Excuse me," she barked, tone like cold steel, "I'm Patricia Garrison, president of the Pine Valley Property Standards Authority. You are currently in violation of multiple community codes." I exchanged a glance with Jake. I said, "Ma'am, there's no HOA out here. We checked before I bought the land." Her eyes narrowed, and she shoved a paper in my hands. "This is a courtesy compliance notice citing Code 44B, unauthorized camouflage display, and Code 17A, excessive lawn recreation." I scanned the paper. It looked official, until you noticed she'd created the codes herself and printed them in Comic Sans on fake stationery. "Patricia," I said evenly, "this is my land. We're just having a cookout." That's when she lost it. "This is clearly a militia training exercise," she snapped. "I see military vehicles, combat tents, and what appears to be tactical cooking equipment." Jake, who happened to be wearing an apron that read "Grill Sergeant," nearly spit out his beer. "Tactical cooking? Lady, it's a Weber." But she wasn't done. The next morning, I stepped outside with my coffee and spotted Patricia perched on her rooftop deck, binoculars in hand, clipboard on her lap. She was conducting full-blown surveillance. Every time one of us moved, she took notes. When Carlos started his morning workout, she whipped out a telephoto lens and began snapping photos like she was building a case for the Pentagon. "She's not bluffing," I said, watching Patricia through the kitchen window as she stood on her rooftop with binoculars. Tommy raised an eyebrow. "Yesterday, I told him. She said our American flag was hung at a non-regulation height. And that was just the start. By noon, Patricia escalated. She actually called animal control to report what she described as a feral meat smoker loose on my property. When the officer arrived, he took one look at our setup, a few grills, some smoke, and a bunch of veterans with beers, and shook his head. "You guys enjoy yourselves," he said. Turns out, he'd dealt with Patricia before. Last month, she called about a suspicious squirrel convention, he added, chuckling as he drove off. But day 3. That's when the real fireworks started. We'd organized a casual fishing competition down at the lake. Jake even brought a tiny gold trophy he found at a pawn shop. Spirits were high, the rods were cast, and the early morning sun reflected off the water. That's when Patricia showed up again, this time in chest-high waders, storming the shoreline with a megaphone clutched in both hands. "Attention unauthorized recreators," her voice bellowed across the lake. "You are engaged in non-permitted aquatic activity. Cease and desist immediately." Ray, reeling in a base, glanced over his shoulder, dumbfounded. "It's a lake," he muttered. "People fish in lakes." But Patricia was already stepping into the water, still shouting about maritime violations and fish harassment. The chaos hit its peak when Mike's fishing line accidentally tangled with the straps of her waders. She panicked, flailing as the megaphone slipped from her hands and vanished beneath the surface with a splash. Seconds later, she followed it, toppling backward into the lake with enough force to clear out every fish within sight. Of course, we helped her out, because Marines aren't monsters, but Patricia was seething. Soaked and fuming, she jabbed a trembling finger in my direction and hissed, "This means war." Day 4 arrived, our final reunion day, and with it, a scene that would live forever in Marine Corps group chats. At 7 a.m., Patricia came marching up my driveway in what could only be described as a cosplay security guard outfit, fake utility belt, oversized badge, and enough pepper spray to fog the county. Clipped to her hip was a label maker, of all things. "David Sullivan," she shouted, eyes blazing. "Your unauthorized gathering has officially resulted in 73 violations of Pine Valley Property Standards Authority Code." I stood there in my pajamas, coffee in hand, and answered evenly, "Patricia, those codes aren't real. You invented them. There's no HOA here. You have no authority." That did it. Her face turned so red, it bordered on purple. "How dare you question my authority? I've been protecting property values in this neighborhood for 5 years. Behind her, my buddies had started to gather, Frank filming with his phone, Carlos barely containing his laughter, and Jake casually flipping pancakes on the infamous Weber grill. Patricia reached her breaking point. "That's it. I'm calling 911. This is a paramilitary compound. There are combat veterans, tactical cooking gear, and aggressive displays of patriotism." She jabbed at her phone screen, dialing emergency services. What she didn't realize was that Ray Caldwell, still in his Marine Corps reunion t-shirt, was now a county dispatcher. Not just any dispatcher either, he was on the exact shift Patricia had just called. We all watched as Ray's phone buzzed. He looked at it, looked at Patricia, then back at the phone with a slow, mischievous grin. "Excuse me a moment," he said, walking a few feet away to take the call. In full dispatcher mode, he answered, 911, what's your emergency?" He listened patiently as Patricia spun her story. "You're saying someone threatened you, with cooking equipment?" A pause. "Can you describe this tactical spatula in detail?" She never caught on that it was Ray's voice. She rambled about unauthorized tents, military uniforms, and non-compliant patriotic displays, while Ray nodded and jotted fake notes onto a napkin like it was official business. Then, 5 minutes later, came the roar, not of sirens, but engines. A thunderous line of 6 jeeps tore over the hilltop, tires crunching gravel, American flags flying. They were packed with off-duty Marines from nearby towns. Ray, in full reunion spirit, had fired off the group signal, the Marine version of the bat signal, and summoned every veteran within 20 miles to come join the party. They came over the ridge like a convoy straight out of Iraq, music thumping, American flags waving proudly, and coolers packed with reinforcements. Jeeps and trucks rolled in, tires crunching the gravel like an entrance queue from an action movie. Who called the fun police? They roared in unison as they parked in a semicircle around my property. Patricia's jaw hung open in disbelief as Marine after Marine poured out of the vehicles, unit shirts, bumper stickers, and even Big Jim, who made his grand entrance wearing cargo shorts under his Marine dress blue jacket. He cracked open a beer, grinned wide, and said, "Heard you were having a Patricia problem. Can't let that stand. Marines don't leave Marines behind, especially when there's good barbecue involved." When Deputy Holland finally arrived, 10 minutes after the impromptu Marine invasion, he found Patricia surrounded by 24 veterans laughing, flipping steaks, and swapping stories. Someone had the grill going again. Big Jim was mid-sentence, describing his 3-month Marine diet in the desert. Patricia, on the other hand, was about ready to detonate. She stormed up to the deputy, pointing frantically. "Arrest them. They're trespassing. They're disturbing the peace. They're aggressively patriotic." Deputy Holland, who I later learned was a Navy vet, took one look around and barely suppressed a smirk. "Ma'am," he said, calm as a judge, "do you have any legal documentation that gives you authority over this property?" Patricia, ever confident, whipped out a sparkly binder labeled Patricia's Authority Manual in glitter glue. Inside were Facebook printouts, clippings from a 1998 lawn care magazine, and what looked like HOA bylaws she'd found online and hastily edited to include Pine Valley Ranch. Deputy Holland flipped through a few pages, squinting. "Ma'am, this isn't a legal document. This is," he paused, clearly searching for diplomacy, "this is basically a Pinterest board with delusions of grandeur." Patricia went pale. But I'm the president of." "Of what?" the deputy interrupted. "There's no HOA here. You can't be president of something that doesn't exist." Then his tone shifted. "And you just admitted to calling 911 to report a barbecue as a militia operation. That's a misuse of emergency services. On top of that, you're currently trespassing." Out came the citation book. As he scribbled, Patricia ranted about combat kitchens, weaponized patriotism, and accused us of aquatic terrorism for the fishing competition. Every word just made things worse. 2 days later, Patricia's meltdown went viral. Her rant, posted to the Pine Valley community page, described surviving a tactical assault by Spatula. The internet didn't disappoint. One commenter said, "Lady, you got served by a dude in a grill sergeant apron. That's not warfare, that's comedy gold." Frank, ever the entrepreneur, fired up his t-shirt press. He printed shirts with Patricia's greatest hits, Tactical Spatula Survivor, Aggressively Patriotic, and Unauthorized Recreators Club. They sold like hotcakes at the VFW. Proceeds went to a veteran barbecue fund. Word got back to Patricia when she spotted someone wearing one at the local grocery store. Eyewitnesses said she ditched her cart and bolted through the emergency exit. By the time court day rolled around, Patricia arrived wheeling a suitcase full of evidence. Inside, blurry Zoom photos of our grills, audio recordings of patriotic music, and a PowerPoint presentation titled The Hidden Dangers of Unauthorized Meat Smoking. She rambled about spiritual contracts of property respect and implied community governance through moral authority. The judge, a former Army JAG officer, wasn't having it. He leaned forward, rubbing his temples. "Ms. Garrison," he said, "you called 911 to report a barbecue. You trespassed. You harassed veterans. And you've been impersonating an HOA officer for 5 years." His sentence was swift and direct. Patricia was ordered to pay my legal fees, take a mandatory civics class on actual property law, and complete 40 hours of community service. On top of that, a $5,000 fine plus court costs. Patricia looked stunned. But I was protecting property values, she whispered. The gavel came down like thunder. Case closed. And Ms. Garrison, if you ever show up in this courtroom again for harassing your neighbors, the consequences will be far more severe. She stood there frozen as the bailiff gently guided her out of the room. The legend of the tactical spatula incident was born, and Patricia would never live it down in Pine Valley Ranch.